Imagine, for a second, that you're playing a massive, incredibly detailed open-world video game.
Right, like one of those games where you can just wander around for hours.
Exactly. You're walking your character through this beautiful, peaceful forest on a sunny day. Everything is totally normal.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But then you go into the game's developer console, and you change exactly one single microscopic line of code.
Just one line.
Just one tiny line. And suddenly, the entire physics engine of the game completely alters. That peaceful sunny day turns into like a surreal, gravity-defying landscape where the sky is pulsing neon and the trees are whispering your secrets back to you.
Wow.
Yeah, just from one tiny line of code.
You know, that video game console is actually a perfect analogy for human consciousness.
Really? How so?
Because if you look at the work of the chemists who actually mapped this out, specifically Alexander and Ann Shulgin, you realize that human perception kind of has its own developer console.
A developer console for the brain.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Right. And what we're exploring today, pulling from this really fascinating analysis by SpiralSeekr on the innovations of the Shulgins' foundational texts, Tikal and Tikal, is how the precise microscopic geometry of atomic structures can radically and reliably rewrite subjective human experience.
I mean, the idea that your fundamental sense of self, like your personality, your deepest feelings, might just be a biological lock waiting for the right molecular key is, well, it's a lot to process.
It definitely is.
But before we get into the heavy neurobiology of how this actually works, I feel like we need to understand who the Shulgins were, because they aren't just, historical footnotes.
Oh, absolutely not.
They were really the cartographers of this entire territory.
They absolutely were. I mean, Alexander, or Sasha Shulgin, as he was known, was this brilliant chemist. And what he and his wife, Anne, accomplished in the late 20th century, it really represents one of the most audacious phases of human neuropharmacological exploration.
Audacious is definitely the right word for it.
Right. They didn't just casually stumble upon a chemical compound here and there. Operating out of a lab behind their house in California, they engaged in the systematic synthesis of hundreds of novel synthetic psychedelics.
Okay, wait, let me just unpack this. When you say systematic synthesis, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Are we talking about, like, throwing chemicals in a beaker to see what happens?
No, not at all. It was incredibly methodical. Shulgin would take a known molecular skeleton-like a phenethylamine, which is a core structure found in a lot of neurotransmitters, and he would tweak it.
Just tweak it slightly.
Exactly. He would add a single carbon atom to one side. Then he would synthesize that new compound, literally physically consume it himself, and meticulously document the psychological and cognitive effects.
He took them himself. That's incredible.
He did. And then he would go back to the lab, move that exact same carbon atom just one position to the left, synthesize that new version, take it, and document the effects again.
Wow. So he's basically just inching his way across the molecule.
Yeah. Yes. They were methodically building and testing these chemical structures, cataloging the resulting psychological states with incredible precision. I mean, they were literally drawing a grid over the wilderness of the human mind.
Okay, so this is where I need to push back a little bit, or at least get some clarity for myself and the listener.
Sure, go ahead.
Because when you talk about creating a map, connecting atomic structures to human consciousness, it's very easy to view that as like a metaphor.
Right, right.
Are we literally talking about changing the physical shape of a molecule, just a fraction of a nanometer, in order to completely change a human being's mood, perception, and reality?
We are absolutely talking about physical spatial reality. It isn't just some vague generalized correlation where, this chemical makes you feel weird.
Okay.
The Shulgins proved that sweeping, profound alterations in human consciousness are directly causally linked to the precise geometry of these atomic structures.
Precise geometry?
Yes. The physical shape of the molecule literally dictates the shape of the experience. If you change the geometry of the atom, you change the phenomenology of the human taking it.
Okay, so they proved this correlation on paper, and obviously in their own subjective experiences in that lab behind their house.
Yeah.
But if we actually zoomed in on a human brain while someone is taking one of these compounds, what is that geometric shape physically interacting with? Like, what is the mechanical why behind it?
So to understand the why, you have to look at the human cortex, specifically at a site called the 5-HT2A receptor.
The 5-HT2A receptor. Got it.
Yeah. This receptor is a protein that sits on the surface of your brain cells. And you can think of it as an extraordinarily complex three-dimensional lock built right into the very architecture of your brain.
Okay, and the classical psychedelics, like the compounds the Shulgins are synthesizing, those act as the keys.
Yes, exactly. But here's where the biology gets incredibly nuanced. It's not as simple as, like, putting the key in the lock, turning it, and opening a single door.
Oh, it's not.
No. The efficacy of these compounds depends not merely on inserting the key, but on the exact topographical angle at which the key forces the lock to twist.
The angle of the twist.
Right. In neuropharmacology, this is a phenomenon known as functional selectivity, or biased agonism.
Okay, biased agonism. Let's ground functional selectivity in a real-world context for a second, because that term sounds straight out of a textbook.
It really does.
It's not just a pass or fail key card, right? It's more like a dial on a massive, highly secure bank vault.
That's a great way to look at it.
You insert the key, but the angle at which it turns changes absolutely everything about the outcome. If you turn the key 3 degrees to the left, the vault opens and you get the cash drawer.
Right.
But if you turn that exact same key 4 degrees to the left, you don't get the cash. Instead, you trigger the silent alarm and lock down the whole building. The angle of the turn dictates the cascading response.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanism. When you insert the classical psychedelic key into the 5-HT2A receptor, the lock physically changes shape to accommodate it. And if the key is shaped slightly differently, the receptor twists at a completely different topographical angle. And that angle dictates which specific proteins on the inside of the cell get activated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That cascading response in your bank vault analogy, that's what biologists call an intracellular signaling cascade.
Intracellular signaling cascade.
Yeah.
So what are the dominoes falling inside the cell?
Well, inside the neuron, you have different pathways waiting to be triggered. You have G-protein pathways, which might lead to one type of neural firing.
Okay.
And then you have beta-arrestin pathways, which might lead to a completely different type of neural behavior. The specific angle of the receptor's twist decides which of these internal domino pathways gets knocked over.
That is wild. It's molecular lockpicking at the absolute highest level.
It really is.
And the Shulgins were the master lockpickers. But what did their lockpicks actually look like?
Right, the molecules themselves.
Yeah, because the research mentions very specific structural modifications they would make to the chemical skeleton of a phenethylamine molecule. Things like the relocation of a methoxy group or adding a methyl chain to an alpha carbon.
Yes.
To a layperson, moving a methoxy group sounds like a microscopic bookkeeping error. What does that actually mean physically?
So a methoxy group is essentially a cluster. It's made of an oxygen atom bound to a carbon atom and a few hydrogens, and it's physically bulky.
Bulky, like it takes up real estate.
Exactly. It takes up space, and it alters the electron cloud of the entire molecule. So if you take that bulky appendage and shift it from position number 4 on a chemical ring to position number 5, you have fundamentally changed the topography of the entire compound.
Wow, okay.
It's like taking a standard house key and, I don't know, welding a small, dense bead of metal onto one side of it.
That would definitely change how it fits in the door.
Right. It changes the binding affinity, how tightly and at what precise angle it fits into that 5-HT2A lock. And because of functional selectivity, that new angle entirely alters the intracellular alarm system you just described.
Okay, I think we understand the biological lock and key mechanism now. We understand the vault and the dominoes.
Right.
But what does turning that key actually feel like to you, the person experiencing it? Because going from a shifted methoxy group to a radically altered human experience is a massive leap.
It is a huge leap.
Let's talk about the comparison between two specific compounds that the source mentions, because it perfectly illustrates this, 2CB and 2CE.
Ah, yes. 2CB and 2CE are closely related compounds from the Shulgins' work, and they share a very similar underlying phenethylamine skeleton.
Right.
But the experiential difference between the two is staggering. 2CB is widely known as a relatively manageable empathogenic compound.
Empathogenic meaning it generates empathy.
Yeah, exactly. It fosters feelings of warmth, emotional openness, and just really deep interpersonal connection. It leaves the user largely grounded in reality, just with a heightened sense of empathy.
Got it. Whereas 2CE, on the other hand, is known as an unapologetically complex, heavy, and intensely visual experience.
Yes. It forces the user into a highly analytical headspace, and it's often accompanied by sweeping geometric hallucinations. It is a completely different world.
And this is the part that blows my mind. The underlying neurobiology remains fundamentally similar. Both compounds are acting on the exact same 5-HT2A receptors in the cortex.
That's the crucial point.
But because of a slight topological variation between the two molecules, literally just a tiny difference in their physical shape, the receptor twists differently, triggering a different internal cascade.
Right.
And that cascade completely reroutes the flow of sensory information across the entire brain.
It does.
Wait, but if the lock is the same, and the key is just slightly fatter on one side, how does that entirely change which part of the brain lights up? How do we go from a cellular cascade to brain-wide hallucinations?
Because the neurons with these receptors, they're connected to massive networks. When 2CB turns the lock, it might preferentially signal networks involved in emotional processing.
Okay.
But with 2CE, that slight structural change causes a cascade that suddenly channels information heavily through the visual cortex and specifically the claustrum.
The claustrum, what exactly is that doing in this context?
So the claustrum is this thin, sheet-like structure buried really deep in the brain. It connects to almost every region of the cortex.
Really? Like a central hub?
Yeah, neuroscientists often compare it to the conductor of an orchestra. It's believed to be highly involved in integrating all our sensory data, tying together what you see, what you hear, and what you feel into a single, cohesive, conscious experience.
Oh, okay, so it runs the whole show.
Pretty much. So if a specific molecular shape like 2CE alters the signaling in the claustrum, the conductor basically loses the standard sheet music.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The sensory data gets crossed, looped, and intensely magnified. That's why you get complex visual geometry instead of just feeling warm and empathetic.
So if I shift the structure of a molecule just a tiny bit, my brain's central switchboard starts aggressively routing my perception of reality through the visual cortex instead of the emotion centers.
Exactly.
It proves that these subjective experiences, things we usually think of as purely psychological or, even spiritual, are not random at all.
No, they aren't.
When a person experiences deep empathy on 2CB or complex geometric hallucinations on 2CE, those aren't just chaotic misfirings of a drugged brain. They are hard-coded, replicable states of human consciousness that are directly mapped to specific atomic configurations.
Yes. It tells us that these profound human experiences are resting inside our biology, just waiting.
Just waiting to be unlocked.
Right. The states of empathy or auditory distortion or a feeling of universal oneness, they are already built into the architecture of the 5-HT2A receptor network. They just require the exact right topographical key to unlock them.
Empathy is a shape. Visual geometry is a shape. I mean, this is where I start having a hard time, honestly.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Because if empathy and ego dissolution are just hard-coded biological responses to atomic shapes, we really have to talk about the massive philosophical implications this has.
We do.
Because we are venturing into the territory of the human soul, and the reductionism here is terrifying.
It really forces a confrontation with the stark mechanical nature of our own minds. By isolating the exact atomic geometry required to shift an experience from, say, terrifying existential dissolution to overwhelming empathetic unity, we strip away a lot of the mysticism surrounding these states.
Yeah. Take a second and think about the most profound moment of connection you've ever felt in your life. Maybe it was a moment of deep spiritual awe, or a feeling of total overwhelming love where you felt entirely connected to the universe.
Right.
Now imagine someone in a lab coat holding up a diagram of a molecule and telling you that your profound realization was entirely dependent on the singular placement of a carbon atom on a synthetic chain.
It kind of ruins the magic, doesn't it?
It really does. The text poses this central philosophical debate. If confronting a conceptual deity or experiencing total ego death comes down to molecular geometry, is subjective spirituality simply an illusion? Is it just a biological trick generated by geometric key and lock receptor mechanics?
That is the classic tension of reductionism right there. If we can reduce profound spiritual awe to the angle of a methoxy group fitting into a 5-HT2A receptor, it's so easy to assume the awe isn't real, that it's just biological machinery humming along.
Right. It's just gears turning.
But there is a completely different way to look at this, a profound alternative that balances the equation.
Okay, what is it?
What if molecular chemistry is the literal programming language through which divinity is accessed?
Oh. Meaning the mechanics don't necessarily invalidate the experience.
Exactly. Think of it like a radio.
Okay.
If a radio is tuned to a specific, precise frequency to catch a broadcast, the fact that we completely understand the transistors, the dials, and the electromagnetic waves doesn't mean the music it's playing isn't real.
Right. The music is still happening.
The music exists out there. The radio just needed to be configured perfectly to receive it. The stark mechanical nature of our souls doesn't have to ruin the magic.
I love that analogy.
It might just mean that molecular chemistry is the literal physical language that the universe uses to allow us to access these states. The Shulgins weren't just making chemicals in this light, they were translating the vocabulary of consciousness itself.
They were writing the dictionary for the language of the mind.
Exactly.
That completely reframes the entire conversation. Okay, as we start to pull all of this together, let's look at the incredible arc we've covered today in this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. We started with the sheer audacity of Alexander and Ann Shulgin methodically moving carbon atoms one by one to build this massive systematic map of neuropharmacology with P-Schal and T-Schal.
And then we moved into the biology of the 5-HT2A receptor, understanding it not just as a simple lock, but as a complex 3D vault.
Right.
A vault that relies on the exact topographical angle of a molecular key to trigger highly specific intracellular cascades, those falling dominoes inside the cell.
And we saw how that microscopic torque plays out in real life, comparing the warm, grounded empathy of 2CB with the heavy, visually complex reality of 2CE.
Yeah.
We learned how an altered chemical shape physically reroutes sensory data through integrative networks like the Claustrum, which ultimately brought us face-to-face with the mechanics of the human soul, debating whether chemistry is just an illusion of spirituality or the very programming language of our deepest experiences.
It's such a comprehensive look at how physical structure dictates subjective experience. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thread to pull on, building purely on the revelations from this material.
Ooh, all right. Lay it on us.
So we've established that our phenomenological states, empathy, visual distortion, spiritual awe, are hard-coded, replicable states mapped to specific atomic configurations. We know the molecular shapes that unlock the emotions we already recognize.
Right, we found the keys to the rooms we already live in.
Exactly. But if all of our known subjective states are fundamentally just geometric keys turning biological locks, does that mean there are synthetic atomic configurations out there that could unlock entirely new emotions?
Wait, new emotions.
Yeah. Alexander Shulgin synthesized hundreds of compounds, but chemically speaking, the possible permutations are nearly endless.
That's true.
He only mapped a fraction of what's mathematically possible. So could there be a completely foreign state of consciousness, physically possible to synthesize, that no human being in the history of our species has ever felt before?
Oh my God.
An emotion or a perception of reality that is currently waiting, locked away in the geometry of an undiscovered molecule.
Like finding a cheat code in our video game developer console that doesn't just change the gravity, but introduces a color that no human eye has ever seen. Or an emotion we don't even have a word for yet.
Exactly.
Wow, that is something to sit with. Next time you feel a rush of emotion or a profound moment of awe, I encourage you to ponder the microscopic geometry making it all possible. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the chemistry of consciousness. We'll catch you next time.